Thank you. Thank you very much.
One of the worst management myths out there is that good employee relations means never offending anyone. And I'll tell you, you hear that all the time. Someone will be sitting in a meeting and someone else will come up with a halfway decent idea. And then you'll hear someone in the room say something like, "Oh, I don't know, somebody might get upset." That's what we would hear from probably the worst human resource person in the room, Catbird. Now think about this. What an impossible standard. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to enable all of the hypersensitive people out in the world? My favorite analogy is that if you gave a $1,000 bonus to everybody that works for you, wouldn't 5 to 10% complain that they had to drive all the way in to get it? And we're worried about upsetting these people? Why? Oh my gosh, what if we would actually do something and only 90 or 95% of the employees liked it? I'll tell you right now, I've been doing this well over 30 years, and I have never in my life ever heard a CEO say, "We want to accomplish our goals, but I don't want to upset anybody." No matter what you do, someone is going to be upset. Well, that's where we get the rules of leadership. Now, these are not the rules of leadership that you would study at Ohio State MBA program or any place like this. But I'll tell you, these are the rules of leadership that far too many people follow. Rule number 1, never upset anybody. Ooh, we wouldn't want to upset anybody. I'll tell you, it doesn't matter what you do. Someone is going to be upset. And that's okay. The tail shouldn't wag the dog. Rule number 2, avoid all forms of conflict. Well, I'll tell you, that is ridiculous. In the 15 minutes or so it will take you to listen to this podcast, someone's going to get upset. There's going to be conflict. You cannot avoid it. And actually, conflict is a good thing. That is actually how we build trust. I need to show you every time we have conflict that that's okay. That's okay. I can prove that we have a safe environment. That's called the power of vulnerability. Have you created trust in your organization? Because if you have not created trust, which means you have proven to people that it's okay to disagree with you, then you can forget any type of team building. So, oh no, you avoid conflict, you're going to be an enabler. You're going to be one of those passive aggressives that never tells you anything truthful to your face. They wait until you leave. And then they gut you from ear to ear. And rule number 3 is my favorite. Oh, never address an issue. Ignore it. It'll go away. You are enabling the problem. If you're enabling the problem, you're the problem. You have to address an issue. Burying a problem just means it's going to ferment. And I always think about this because my grandma and grandpa had a farm. And every so often, as luck would have it, in the winter, a cow would die. Now, you got a cow in the barnyard. So what do? Well, you got to get it out of there. Okay, I mean, you can't just leave dead cows laying around. So my grandpa would take the farm-all tractor and you hook a chain up to the cow. So what do? You drag the cow out away from where the kids are playing, right? I mean, you don't want to see the grandkids jumping around on some bloated cow. So you take it way out in the back 40. Now you got a choice. What are you going to do? Are you going to dig a hole and bury the cow? Or are you just going to leave it there until spring? And I'll tell you, that is exactly what you do when you never address an issue. Ignore it, it'll go away. Let me tell you, as hard as it is to bury a cow in January, you bury the cow. That is what you do. You deal with it now. Because I'll tell you, come March or April, you got one big stinky cow. It's 10 times worse. And as you've probably figured, these are the rules of enablers. Rules of enablers. Oh, never upset anybody. Avoid all forms of conflict. Never address an issue. Ignore it. It'll go away. That is the kiss of death. And I'll tell you, this is what I tell supervisors whenever I'm doing supervisory training. We talk about supervisor training, management training. There is one skill, one, that is head and shoulders above everything else. If you cannot resolve conflict, you got to get out of management. You cannot be in management. We typically promote people because they were really good technicians. You know, you were a great engineer. You were a great nurse. You were a great plumber. You were great whatever. That's great. You're a technician. That doesn't mean that you can handle conflict. You have got to resolve it. You can't suppress it, and you can't escalate it. You've got to resolve it. Now, I tell you, in today's society, it is like we get offended by everything. What are we offended by today? Oh, it's going to be something. You know, just take a pick. Well, I'll tell you, that is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. There are hypersensitive people out there. And I'll tell you, this is right from the United States Supreme Court. You left the house today. You left the house. So guess what? You're going to be offended. Live with it. This actually comes from a 1993 case, Harris versus Forklift Systems. Now think about that. You have been living under this standard for over 20 years. Whether you knew it or not, this is the standard for hypersensitivity given to us by the United States Supreme Court. And here's what happened. You got a guy by the name of Charles Hardy, and Charles Hardy is a pig. He is just a pig, worthless human being, horrible human being. He likes to go up to his female employees, and he likes to open up his pocket, and he orders them to reach in to his pocket and fish around for change, and he'll say, "Hey, come on, hun, why don't you reach on in here and get some change out for the Coke machine?" Yes, believe it or not, this is a grown man, okay? Welcome to my world. Anyway, he's doing that. Employees come in, female employees, all right? And he will drop his pants. Now, I don't know exactly, how he was raised, but I'll tell you, that doesn't seem to impress a lot of women. But, think about this. You're flashing women, all right? What else will he do? Oh, he will ask his female employees for sex. He'll go up to them, like he's half kidding, saying, "Hey, come on, hun, why don't we go on over to the Holiday Inn and we'll negotiate your raise?" Okay, you are really licking the outlet here. Okay, this guy is going to go down, all right? But you got to remember, this is 1993. So, the final straw was he went up to one of his female employees, Teresa Harris, thus the name of the case, and she has a big sale of forklifts. Made a big sale. Brings the client in, introduces the client to Charles Hardy. Charles Hardy looks at her, looks at the client, and says, "Well, what'd you do? Promise him sex?" Right in front of the guy. Okay. She sues. This goes all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And here's what they said. They said, there's a two-part test we're going to use here. First of all, is Teresa Harris horribly offended by this? Well, of course she is. Otherwise, she wouldn't be suing. But here's the real test. This is the test we've been living with for 20 plus years. What would the reasonable person in the community think? What would they think? Now, back in 2003, the reasonable community was probably the local town or something like that. But I'll tell you, today, the reasonable community is the country. It's the country. And the United States Supreme Court said, well, we think the reasonable person in the community, after, getting exposed to and asked for sex and all this other kind of stuff, we think that person would be outraged. So here's the test we use today. What is reasonable? If what you did or what you're gonna do would end up on the front page of USA Today, what would most people think? If most people would be offended, well, then you've got a right to be offended. If most people would not be offended, then it's you. I don't ever tell hypersensitive people they're hypersensitive. That just isn't going to go well, all right? They're pet peeves. And here's some great motherly, fatherly advice from the United States Supreme Court. We live in a society. We live in a society. It isn't all about you. And I'll tell you, we don't like to hear that. Oh, of course it's all about me. I'm the most important thing in my world. No, you're not. You left the house today. So guess what? You're going to hear other people's opinions on gun control. You are going to see things that offend you. Would the reasonable person in the community also be offended? And if the answer to that is no, then live with it. It isn't all about you. Now again, that is not a real scientific standard, but anyone who knows anything about employment law knows this is about as scientific as it gets. What would most people think? So let's look at a few examples here. My favorite example that I experienced with this actually happened at a large public sector employer right here in Columbus, Ohio. And I was teaching a class on sexual harassment. And there's a famous case from the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal. We affectionately refer to this as the sniffing case. It's actually Mendoza versus Borden. And it happened several years ago, but it's an oldie but a goodie. And basically the bottom line is, here's a supervisor, and he goes up to Red Mendoza, who happens to be at the copier, puts his head down near her groin, and sniffs her. Okay, just let that sink in for just a minute there. Okay, well, clearly the reasonable person in the community would certainly be offended by that. Okay, so I use that as an example as what would the reasonable person in the community be offended by. All right. Well, we had about 600 people that went through this session. And of course, 5–10% of everybody you meet, well, they're just crazy. They're just hypersensitive. And no matter what you say, they're going to be upset. And of course, we had some people that were upset that I used the word groin. Okay, now I had the Vice President of Human Resources come up to me and say, well, we had about 3 or 4 people that were upset that you used the word groin. I said, well, yeah, that sounds about right. She goes, well, we really don't want to upset anybody. And I'm like, well, you're teaching sexual harassment. All right, do you understand the topic itself is going to be offensive? And this is a famous case. And actually, it's one of the best examples of offensive behavior that's out there. Shocking case. And serious as a heart attack. The HR person looked at me and said, well, do you know of another term that you can use other than groin? And I'm like, well, yeah, actually, I know lots of them. They're not better. Actually, if they're offended by groin, they sure as heck aren't going to like the other ones I got for this. Groin is the technical term. right? That is the technical term. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, these people would have a heart attack if they ever went to medical school and they started hearing terms like penis or God knows what else. It's like, those are the technical terms. That's it. That is a pet peeve. That is hypersensitivity. And it's also enabling behavior. You left the house today. That's the proper term. This is one of my favorites. Here you got a genius here. Iowa State Trooper Craig Franklin. And this was on January 20th, 2008. And he's sitting around, and for those of you that have a calendar in front of you, that was Martin Luther King Day. So this genius is sitting there, and he has good idea number one. I'm going to dress up like a Klansman. Yeah, that'll do it. Okay. Good idea number two. I'm going to have somebody take a digital picture of me. Okay. Now, first of all, for anybody out there that's listening that is in the public sector, do you realize that when you record something or take a picture of something, when you are on the clock, when you are on working time, the public is paying you? That is a public record. I, as a citizen, own that. So, a couple years go by, and this thing surfaces. All right, well, I'll tell you right now, that's the end of his career. Right there. Just that is it. Done. Now, some people are going to look at that and say, oh, he was just kidding, it's not a big deal. Yeah, absolutely. But what do most people think? What would the reasonable person in the community say if that ended up on the front page of USA Today? And I can tell you right now, oh, that would be bad. How about staring? No, how about staring? How about nonverbals? I love this. I run into this all the time. I had this most recent case with a warehouse, right? A guy sitting on the dock eating his lunch, and he would just glare and stare and leer at the women as they walked by. And of course he would say, well, I'm not saying anything. Well, that's true. 93% of your message is nonverbal, pal. And I got news for you. This isn't new. You understand what I'm telling you. This has been around for over 20 years. This has been in the courts and in the regulations for over 20 years. You're not going to think of anything new. So if you look over and you see this guy just looking at you, I don't know what happened to his shirt. I'm not really sure there. But I can tell you right now, if that was on the front page of USA Today, you're in trouble. How about leering? How about just leering at women? You just feel someone else's eyes on you. Now, I always love to show this picture because I always get somebody really nice and they'll say, well, he's probably looking at the jewels. You know? Yeah, I'll bet he is. That's one of your euphemisms. Now, don't worry though. You know, Scarlett's in no danger. She's way too old for Woody. So, leering, staring, glaring. I'll tell you, on the front page of USA Today, you're toast. Now, this is one of my favorites. I have run across a few people that do seem to think they know this gentleman. Now, first of all, it is a big issue here as to where he lives. And it looks like a trailer. Now, the question is where the trailer is. So let's say that he put his trailer on 42nd Street in New York. I don't know where he would put it, but let's just say he put his toilet out there. Well, I got news for you. That would end up on the front page of USA Today. And I got news for you, pal. The reasonable person in the community is going to be horribly offended. Okay, that says, but you know, what if he's way out in the rural area? Well, you see, this is exactly what the United States Supreme Court was talking about. He hasn't given up his rights. He hasn't given up any of his rights. I used to think people that moved way out to the rural area, that they were like crazy. I don't think so anymore. I think they know what they were talking about, because that's why people move out there, so that they can have their privacy. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to offend a squirrel? I'll tell you, depending on where this guy is, he is offending everybody, or he's offending no one. Now think about it. In your own house, don't you have to turn your stereo down? Yeah, because you don't have any rights. You've given up a lot of rights when you live in the city. If you go out to get the paper, you got to put a robe on. That's how things work, and that's right from the United States Supreme Court, and that is effective still today. Don't enable the hypersensitive people. You're going to create an environment that no one can live in. Don't create a standard that no one can meet. I mean, what a shame. What if only 90 or 95% of your people were happy? What would we do? Well, thank you for listening. I am Scott Warrick. For more information on me and my programs, go to scottwarrick.com. And if you hit on the far left button that is Speaking and Training, you'll see all the different types of programs that I do and I bring on site. Enjoy your day.